Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar, Dynamic Markets, what you need to know. Hopefully everyone's having a good day and a good week so far, and thank you for taking the time out to come along with me on this webinar. Scheduled in for an hour, folks. If anyone's been to my webinars previous, you'll know I have an excellent record of using up exactly all or more than the allocated time. I'm very confident today that we're going to get through this topic. We're going to convey lots of good quality information for you, and we are going to comfortably come in within the hour. I'm aiming to come in between 30 and 40 minutes this afternoon for you folks. So give you back a little bit of time versus the advertised. So let's see how we get on and let's get started. For those of you that haven't been to a webinar from ourselves before, my name's Andrew Watson. I'm the bid training consultancy manager here at Proactis. So I and the team are looking after our clients to be as ensure they are as successful as possible with all things related to bidding within the public sector. And to that end, we're here for this webinar to try and convey a little bit of information about this new aspect that's come in, this new type of approach called dynamic markets, which have gone live as a result of the Procurement Act coming into effect towards the end of February of this year. So obviously a good few months ago, and we can talk about what's happening since then and how specifically the dynamic markets are being used and what to look out for. So hopefully to equip you to be a little bit more comfortable when you do come across them and make some informed decisions about how they can play a part in your overall approach as an organization looking to secure work within the public sector. So with that said, what I was going to say is I will try and see if, as we're going across, see if I can pick up some questions. So do feel free to punch some questions in the chat. If we don't get on to the questions during the actual webinar proper, then I will try and do a little bit of a review of those and get back to you. And obviously, I'll give contact details at the end. If there's anything you want to discuss in a little bit more detail, then we can pick up on that too at a later point. But for now, I can see that my face seems to be rather flashing in and out of focus, which dependent on your viewpoint may or may not be a good thing. But let's crack on and see where we can get to across this lunchtime. So in terms of the agenda, what we're going to look to cover across this webinar is all about, as I've said, dynamic markets, and we will do just in a minute or two a little bit of an introduction, understanding a little bit of the context of how they've come to be and what they're supposed to do. We'll then talk a little bit about actually what are dynamic markets, and from there we'll try and understand, well, actually why are buying authorities choosing to use them to set up and to run dynamic markets as one of a number of different procurement procedures that they've got available to them. We will look at this through the lens of the supplier because that's obviously the target audience for this webinar. So we'll ask the question, should I be joining them? Should I look for them? Should I join them? And if I'm going to do that, how do I do that? And then what we'll do is we'll pick up, I've been through and there are a few kind of common questions that have been asked as part of the registration. So I've tried to kind of aggregate those and we'll tick off some of those common questions as well. And we'll aim to do it in record time for an Andrew Watson led Proactis webinar. So I'm confident, guys. Let's get to it. Let's get going. Okay. Just to then have a little bit of a go into the introduction for this and see kind of where we are. So dynamic markets, where do we start? Well, let's just think a little bit about the context of dynamic markets. What we've got is this is a new terminology that has been introduced as part of the wider range of reforms, adjustments, new terminology, new procedures, new processes that have come into effect as a result of the 2023 Procurement Act. Okay. So the broad kind of umbrella term that we're looking within is about frameworks. And this idea of having frameworks has been retained as part of the Procurement Act. Okay, what exactly is a definition of a framework? It is a contract between contracting authorities and one or more suppliers that provide for a future award of contracts via what we can refer to as call-offs by a contracting authority to an individual given supplier. So it is technically possible to have a framework in place where there is only one supplier that's appointed to that framework. But in the context of what we're looking at here, more commonly, we're looking at it where it's a range of suppliers who are appointed to a framework. And this is where dynamic markets sit. They sit as one of these options, as a framework, as a type of framework that has been developed as part of the Procurement Act with the idea of improving what's already there and aligning to the overall strategic goals, objectives, ideas that are what the Procurement Act is supposed to achieve. So very top level then, dynamic markets are very similar to what we used to refer to as dynamic purchasing systems, more commonly referred to as DPSs, and qualification systems for utility. So they are similar and they've evolved from them, but as a result of the Procurement Act, anything new ones that are created are going to be dynamic markets, and dynamic purchasing systems are no longer available for the as a creation. We're not allowed to, the authorities are not allowed to create those anymore. Okay, we will talk about existing ones and what's happening with those. But in terms of new creation, you create a new one, you wanted a DPS, now you're going to be creating a dynamic market instead. Fundamentally, there are a list of qualified suppliers who will then be eligible to participate in future procurements. Not to say that they're always going to sort of win the future procurements, but just that they're eligible to participate in them. I.e., if they are not on the dynamic market, then there'll be procurements that they are not eligible to participate in. Okay, so there's a membership requirement. Okay. In addition, or in contrast to dynamic purchasing systems, there's more flexibility with them, so they can be used across a wider range of goods, services, or works, and in a wider range of procurement situations versus when a DPS would be appropriate to use. So far, so good, guys. Okay, excellent. So simple stuff, just a little bit of context, and then we can dive into now. Well, actually, what is it? How do they work? What are we really talking about here? So I'm conscious that some of you will be, maybe quite familiar, have worked through applications relating to DPS, and whereas others maybe you are new to the public sector more generally. So we're going to take it sort of step by step and build it up. Okay. In terms of, well, actually, what is it that they are and what is it that they do? Okay, so how do they work as a starter for 10? Okay, so a dynamic market is quote unquote established following the publication of a specific notice. Okay, so it's one of the new notice types. It's called a dynamic market establishment notice. We'll talk through those a little bit more in a second. Once it's established, the authorities then have the option to use competitive flexible procedures to then award contracts within that framework. Okay, and if any of you have, I'm sure I know some of you have seen the registration list, enjoyed/endured some of our previous webinars, we have talked about competitive flexible procedures, and this being the new term to catch all the different options that authorities have for designing procedure types to meet their goals in terms of how they're going to structure and how they are going to determine the process for awarding work. Okay, so anytime within a dynamic market, it is a competitive flexible procedure that will be used to actually start awarding work to the suppliers within that. I'll skip around a little bit on the slide, but basically all of the suppliers who meet the conditions for entry to the dynamic market are appointed onto it. Okay, and the work within a dynamic market can be divided up in lots of different ways. It can be divided up into particular sort of types or subtypes of work that the authorities are looking to procure, and it can be divided up into geographies. So you might have a dynamic market that covers nationwide, but you as a supplier might be interested in saying you're able to supply these goods or services within particular geographies as within a list that they've provided as part of that. And you don't necessarily have to cover all of the types of work that they're looking for or all of the geographies to be able to apply to that dynamic market and say which works and which geographies as examples you are able to cover. Okay. Suppliers can apply at any time to a dynamic market during its lifespan, during its lifetime. So it's not one of these frameworks where a closed framework where if you don't apply to it, before it's up and established, you're then locked out of it. You're able to apply to dynamic markets at any given point. And just for clarity, there are a number of different notices that we can be thinking about as relevant to the process for dynamic markets. Okay, so we've talked again in a previous webinars about authorities will publish a pipeline notice before the start of their financial year for authorities that have an overall spend of 100 million or more, and they'll also in the pipeline notice specify any particular procurement spends that are going to do it that are going to be £2 million or more. So what you might see as a first thing is you might see that there'd be a pipeline notice from a given authority that includes their intention to set up a dynamic market. That might be included. More specifically, what you then might see or what you then will see before the establishment of a dynamic market are a couple of different notices. You will see a dynamic market intention notice, which is the authority saying we are going to establish a dynamic market. We intend to do that. And then there will be the dynamic market establishment notice, which is the notice for them saying we are establishing this. This is what it's all going to entail. This is how you apply to it to be one of that first tranche of suppliers to gain access, to gain membership to that dynamic market. In terms of other notice types, once it's established, any of the given opportunities that are published or that are going to be run through the dynamic market, there will be a tender notice associated with them based on the level of value that it is, based on the overall expected contract value. So what that means is that you will see the opportunities. There will be a notice and it will bring transparency for the actual opportunities, for the packages of work, I like to call them, that are going to be offered and going to be run through that dynamic market. So more visibility that way. And then following the award of those packages of work, there will be contract award notices issued as well. Okay, so hopefully that makes a little bit of sense, brings a little bit of clarity to in terms of like the kind of mechanics, the nuts and bolts of how they are going to work. I am conscious that I do seem to be very blurry unless I put my face right up to the camera, so I'll try that, but apologies. But the slides are more interesting than my face anyway, right? So hopefully that's not too much of an issue. I'm not quite sure why the webinar program is choosing to do that, but let's carry on regardless. Okay, so I've touched on probably a couple of the things already, but just to clarify some of the key features that we are encountering in relation to dynamic markets. As I've mentioned already, new suppliers can be added throughout the entire lifetime of the dynamic market. And this is good for emerging markets where it's going to change. Now that is as it was within the sort of DPS approach. Okay, so that's not a change. There's also no restrictions to the number of suppliers, and again that's the same as it was for DPS as pre the Procurement Act. What's changed and what's different is there's now the opportunity for a greater scope of goods and services to be procured through a dynamic market than was available through DPS, which is a bit more prescriptive and a bit more of a narrow application of them. Okay. And as I mentioned already, one of the key features is new opportunities within the dynamic market are going to be advertised through tender notices in the same way that other contract types would be. So you're going to see them whether or not you are actually a member of that dynamic market or not. Okay, so this is a distinct change where within our framework, the opportunities that are going to be run through the framework are often only visible to those suppliers who are registered and accepted onto the framework. Now, for greater transparency, we are going to be able to see the work packages that are going to be offered through the dynamic market, and those are going to be publicly available widely, and that advertising of them, rather than it just being available for those who are actually members of. Okay, so a little bit of some distinction, some points of similarity and some points of contrast, and just a couple other ways to say that, or a couple other bits to look at when we're looking at this contrast between dynamic markets and dynamic purchasing systems. Okay, so as I made reference to, there's more flexibility within dynamic markets to meet market needs, to set participation conditions, and to run these competitive flexible procedures, which can be designed from bits and pieces of the kind of old set procedure types. So there's much more flexibility around how they're going to run, how they can run, and the types of procurements therefore that they're suitable for. I've mentioned already about the publication of tender notices for the opportunities that are being run within the dynamic market, and that does have the impact and the benefit of improving transparency. So it means everyone can see the opportunities that are going to be flowing through that dynamic market. The fact that they're relatively straightforward to access, the fact that we've got this flexibility and this transparency, and the fact that it's mandated that authorities are supposed to consider how to remove barriers for SME entry to public sector means that they should support new entrants, i.e. SME participation within them. So they should be set up to make it as straightforward as possible for SMEs to get involved and to participate. As I've said before, they can be used for different reasons, for evolving needs and for more complex projects. So again, a wider scope of usage versus DPSs, which although they have some flexibility, don't necessarily allow us to do the same things in terms of are they fully encouraging SMEs? There's still some barriers there with a DPS, and much more narrow focus in terms of the goods and services that are available through them. So again, a bit more access and a bit more flexibility. Okay, when I'm talking about stuff like this, typically I am quoting sort of directly from kind of government website sources. So it's not my opinion. This is what they are sort of designed to specifically do, and what we should see them do over time as we see more and more of them come out, and we can get responding to them or trying to get access to them. Just a little bit more then in terms of clarity. So why, from a buyer's perspective, it's always helpful, even though we're looking to bid into public sector. Not many of us on the webinar here are sitting as within a procurement function within an authority, although typically there are some people that join the webinars. Welcome. But it's still useful to think about. It's helpful to think, well, what is it? Why would buyers use a dynamic market? How are buyers thinking about this? What are their options? Okay, so if they're going to go down the route of looking to appoint suppliers to a framework of some description, under the new Procurement Act, they've got the option of open frameworks, which never used to exist. They've got the option of closed frameworks, which are still valid, but which didn't exist before the Procurement Act. And they've got this option of setting up dynamic markets as opposed to DPS, which was pre-Procurement Act implementation. So if you think about it, and again, the advantages and the benefits of each of these are where they're suitable for. Again, I'm taking from a government website. The idea we're talking about here is about if I'm within a given authority, I want to be trying to think, and I'm going to be doing some procurement. I want to be thinking about strategically, what's the most suitable configurations for the different procurement that we're going to undertake. We know there's lots of things that we need to, as an organization, procure. How can we best organize those things to best effect to ensure value for money, ensure efficiency in terms of the process, ensure we're spending taxpayers' money, which we have an obligation to spend, as efficiently and as generating as much value as we possibly can from that spend, aligned with the strategic goals of the organization and the strategic goals of the procurement that we're looking to undertake. So they have to pick a form, they have to pick an idea, they have to choose one way or another. And if they're going down the route of frameworks, then they've got the choice between, as I've said, closed frameworks, open frameworks, or dynamic markets. So if you just look at like what are the scenarios where they might choose one versus the other like I say, open frameworks are also new as a result of the Procurement Act. So it might be that for lots of you guys on the call, you maybe haven't come across those open frameworks or an open framework opportunity as of yet. And it will specify within that, there are basically frameworks where, and we talked about this in previous webinars, where there are some with restriction, with parameters, opportunities for that framework to be reopened and for suppliers to gain access to it during its lifespan. Okay, but it's not as flexible in terms of opportunities to join as a dynamic market. So a closed framework, which is going to be fixed and closed for a 4-year term. If you're not in it at the start, you're not in it throughout the duration, is going to be more suitable for situations where there's a known and fixed need and the authority has decided that that is best served by a small supplier base, and there will be quite a lot of certainty around what it is that they need and the suppliers that are able to provide that. So it's quite a sort of static way that they're looking for. So it might be that something that's very repeatable, that they feel comfortable that a small number of suppliers would always be able to meet that need, and that need will very unlikely evolve over the course of a number of years. Within that kind of setting, fixed closed framework might be the best option. And they have the option within that to award work within the framework, either with or without competition. A lot of you be familiar with mini competitions, which is often used approach to award work within frameworks, but a framework can either award to an individual organization within the framework with or without actually having a further competition to establish who they want to award the work to. So they've got that option. Open frameworks, again, you have the option of, with a bit of restriction, changing out some of the suppliers or reopening it for entrance. So it might be a scenario where we think there might be some type of evolving needs throughout the course of a maximum of an 8-year term. It can be reopened. You're going to have a manageable supplier base, but maybe you want it a little bit larger, or you want the flexibility to have it come and go. Maybe you think the supplier offerings are likely going to evolve or change over an 8-year period. So you want there to be potential for new entrants to join within that, so that you can potentially get benefit from what they're able to bring into offer. And again, within an open framework, the authority can choose to award work within that, either through competition or actually without the need for further competition. In terms of a dynamic market, well, you've got this unrestricted number of suppliers, so it's best if you decide that you want to meet your needs as an authority. You want that big mix of SMEs and larger organizations, this big supplier mix who are going to have lots of different offerings, albeit that it's a little bit more difficult to manage. Then you might go, okay, well, I want the ability to have suppliers respond to innovation requirements. I want them to be I want to be agile in terms of what we need and how they can meet those needs. Okay. Dynamic markets, again, there's not a maximum term, and you can join at any time at the points I've referenced before. The one distinction I'll say here that's important is within a dynamic market, you cannot, as a supplier, be awarded work without that further competition. Okay, so anytime if you join a dynamic market, you're never just going to be then given work just for being a member of that dynamic market, regardless of how much the authority thinks you might be suitable for a piece of work. It will always go through a further competition mechanism. Okay, so the people within the authorities are going to be thinking about, well, I have to go through I have to create a procurement approach for any given goods or services that I want to procure. what's going to be the most suitable one for me. And what you might see, and this is a little bit of homework for anyone that wants it, is you might want to consider, well, actually, having thought about this a little bit, for the types of goods or services that I'm able to offer to the public sector, what do I see? Do I see a lot of scenarios where they're just looking for one supplier to do a fixed body of work, which is not a framework, or are they looking for is it primarily frameworks that are closed? Have I seen any open frameworks against where there are there lots of dynamic purchasing systems that are appropriate or applicable for the sorts of goods or services? So it might give you a little bit of an insight into the thought process behind that individual authority, so as to understand, like, why have they chosen this particular configuration for their procurement? Does that give me any insight into what it is that they're really looking for? So are there ones that are much more prevalent in your industry or your vertical that you operate in versus in another one? So it's just worth thinking about that, and doing a little bit of desk research and working out where it is you sit, because you might see somewhere, well, DPSs are going to be previous and dynamic markets into the future, much more common with certain goods and services than with others. Okay, so just have a little bit of a think about that and see. It might have a bearing on what ones you want to apply to, what you think is important to talk about during those applications. So, talked about the different type of frameworks, dynamic markets being there, what some of the contrasting features of them are. So within that context, why are buyers using dynamic markets above and beyond what we've just put in there? Well, they've got the option to run fast and efficient procurements once they're established. So if you think about it, it's this sort of pre-approved list of suppliers, rather than if they were to go and do an open procedure every time they wanted to procure anything, they would have to either have that 25-day period from start to finish as a minimum for an open procedure. They'd have to ask all the stuff around the sort of selection questionnaire, all of that information to validate the suppliers. Whereas if you've got this approved list, you can run procurements with a minimum of a 10-day period. Okay, so it could be quicker and more efficient than going out as a separate piece each and every time for every work package they might want to do. They're using them because they don't want to necessarily be tied in either entirely or with some caveats to the same group of suppliers to be able to meet their needs. Maybe they think, I want to give more opportunities to new entrants, to entrants as they're establishing themselves, etc. So this is a really good approach that allows me to do that as new suppliers, in comments, better suppliers come online on board, establish themselves. I want the opportunity for them to be able to secure the work for what I'm looking to procure. Because of the notices happening within them, it is aligning more to those goals of visibility and transparency. So don't have to worry about it being a little bit blocked off and people not seeing what's being run through them. That's really clear now. And the way that they're set up, having this approved supplier list, not capping the number of suppliers, it is encouraging SME participation as well, which is obviously something that the Procurement Act absolutely obligates authorities to, at the very least, consider and try and facilitate wherever possible. So because dynamic markets are a good route for SME participation, then it's a natural choice for them to use them where they could, so they can demonstrate that they are trying to facilitate SME participation and remove barriers to them. And they're using them more broadly, or we assume that they will be using them more broadly in the future, because they are more flexible and have a wider range of situations where they're suitable for versus what DPSs were. Okay. So that's a little bit of the context and a little bit of an understanding around how what the buyer's thought process really regarding that. I'm wondering if I'm just super blurry all the time, but I keep checking. It's a little bit on the frustrating side, but hopefully it's not too distracting and the slides are still working. Okay, so let's look at this back through the lens of suppliers, which most of us are. Let's talk about, should we join dynamic markets? And if we're going to do that, how do we go about doing it? Make it a little bit less theoretical and a little bit more practical. So In terms of should we join dynamic markets, and I think some of these ideas already have kind of come out. So this is just another way of looking at them through that lens of what's to our advantage, what's to our different advantage. And with anything, there's pros and cons with this, with looking at them and looking to join them. The pros are they're a really good starting point to get into the public sector. It can feel, I speak to lots of organizations who are fairly early on in their journey in terms of looking to pursue and secure public sector contracts, and it can feel quite an intimidating process. And the idea that it's like, well, I don't know if we're good enough, and how are we going to win versus others who have been doing this for ages and larger companies that are established. How am I going to win, and how am I going to beat them to contracts, etc. So dynamic markets can be seen as like a really good starting point to get into public sector, to get on these effectively like these sort of approved supplier lists, which is in essence kind of what they are. Um, so you know that there's not any limits on the number of applicants. They're never capped. So if you meet the standard, you'll get onto them. Knowing that, you can go, okay, well, you work out, you meet the standard before you apply, and then you can apply and you get on it. And then you then got the option to apply for these work packages. It'll be of different scales, different sizes, once you're there, and you've got that kind of pre-footing already in place. They are typically less burdensome in terms of the effort that's involved to complete them. They are like generally a simpler thing to complete versus other types of procurements. So they are a good point for doing that there. And again, there's available to apply at any time during their duration. So there's not a given deadline, therefore they're easy to work the applications around other existing commitments rather than being hard and fast up against a particular date, which is going to be problematic if you can't meet it. If you apply and for any reason you're unsuccessful, you will get the feedback to confirm that you've been unsuccessful and the reasons why you've been unsuccessful. You can then make your amendments as you need to and actually reapply against that. So it's quite a good, kind of like proving ground, again, linking up with that first point about being a good sort of starting point into the public sector. What are the cons then? Well, because there's going to be typically like quite a high number of suppliers that will be awarded a place because there's no cap to it. There's no guarantee of work. All the work's going to be issued or determined, awarded through a competitive process. So you know you're going to be having to compete further. Nothing's awarded without that competition. And the call-offs, given the number of suppliers, will likely be competitive as well. So it's a foot in the door, but it's not guaranteeing you work, okay? And also with that, you don't know what the breakdown is going to be of the contracts for the packages of work that are going to be issued within the dynamic market, okay? So there's not going to be certainty about, I'm going to apply for this because it will result in me winning £500,000 of business over the next 2 years. It's impossible to know that, okay? Not just because you don't know how many you'll pick up, but you don't know the exact configuration of the different work packages, which ones you might choose to apply to within that, okay? You will still obviously need to monitor the tender notices that are going to be published through the dynamic market. So you will still need to keep an eye on those. So there's still going to be more work to monitor those potential opportunities to determine if you want to then bid for those ones as you would other tenders, okay? So lots of bits to think about. Aside from the points that we've put on there, I would say really it depends on how suitable is the work that's being listed as it's going to be procured, the goods and the services that's going to be procured through the dynamic market. If that's a good fit, or there are bits of it, i.e., the geographies you can select, the work types that are subdivided that you can select. If there's things on it that are a really good fit for what you do, then you can meet those requirements, you can do those things, and you meet all the requirements for application to it, then I would say yes, why would you not apply? Okay, so as long as it's a good fit for the nature of the goods or services that you want to be providing, it's a good strategic fit for where you want your organization to be going, you want to secure the work that they're looking to procure, then worry less about at this stage about the mechanism and do the application to the dynamic market. It's never going to be that arduous to do the application. I say that with a little bit of a pinch of salt, but generally it's not going to be that much of uh, an issue to get on it if you meet the requirements to do that application, and then you're in a position to start filtering through and actually pursuing any of those opportunities that are going through it that might be suitable for your organization. Okay, so I would let that be more the determinant rather than the mechanism itself, with the condition that actually they are the threshold for applying to it should be lower than for other ones, because actually the work involved in completing it is not as challenging as a general rule than other types of tenders. Okay, so all good so far, I hope. A couple more bits and pieces. Practical bit now, guys. How do I actually join a dynamic market? Okay, so to join it, we've got to find it. Okay, I'll bring up. I've got the next. I think it's the next slide. Yeah, I've got some actual notice types on them. But what we need to do is to find a suitable opportunity. So hopefully everyone should have a process in place by which they are getting full visibility of all of the relevant opportunities for them to pursue. For a lot of people on the call, that will be through our platform Tenders Direct, which aggregates all of the different opportunities across the UK and beyond, all of the different public sector opportunities, I should say, across the UK and beyond, so that you understand whenever a new opportunity is come out, you've got access of that for those opportunities that are suitable and you are interested in. If you have a little bit less defined process there or a little bit more scattergun, you do want to make sure that you are seeing all of the potential opportunities across the market. If you don't have Tenders Direct, I'd highly recommend taking a trial or speaking to one of our team. You can get a trial or a demo to show you the breadth of the opportunities that our system picks up, i.e. everything across public sector. Regardless, if you've got your process in place, you're going to find notices. The notice that you are looking to respond to is going to be a dynamic market establishment notice, which is them saying, we are looking to set this up. This is how you apply to it. If you apply to it by this date, you'll be one of the first, you'll be in the first tranche of suppliers to gain access to that particular dynamic market. How do you do that itself? Well, the dynamic market, that tender will be hosted on a procurement platform, of which there are a number of different ones. When you find the opportunity, there'll be a hyperlink through to it. You've got to then go on to that procurement platform, register your interest in that particular opportunity, to download the documents, to understand what your obligations are to complete them, how you go about completing them. If you've not registered on the portal where the opportunity is being hosted, you have to register your organization on that portal first, then you can get access to the documents. We've done separate webinars about some of the impacts of the Procurement Act more broadly, and obviously one of them is that you'll have to be registered on the CDP Central Digital Platform. So you find that's a government website, the Find a Tender service. You need to be registered there with your headline administrative information for your organization so that you can be issued with a PPON, a Public Procurement Organization number, which will then be required to input into whichever portal you're responding to a dynamic market opportunity in, and you have to include that as part of your application, along with all the other requirements, documents, attachments, etc. that you have to do as part of your application. That was jumping ahead a little bit. You've obviously, when you do get access to the document packs on the portal where the opportunity is being hosted, you need to read through those tender documents, establish that it is something you want to pursue in terms of the goods or services that they're looking for, is understand and establish that you meet any minimum requirements for entry into the dynamic market that the authority has set. There may well be some in terms of the level of experience, financial standing, etc., etc. There could be a number of different things that will be minimum requirements that you need to meet to be able to gain access to it. You've then got to do what you always have to do with bids, which is put together a compliant and high quality submission, submit it, and then get your results. Once you're then accepted onto the dynamic market, you've then got to look out for the contract notices, the opportunities that are flowing through it, to make sure that you see those individual work packages that are being that they're looking to procure through it, and make sure you respond to the ones that you're interested in and that are appropriate for you as an organization. Just a little bit of a sort of sense check here, folks, in terms of 24th of Feb 2025, Procurement Act went live. I'll talk about this a little bit more in a second. But if you're looking and saying, well, I can't see any dynamic markets when I've gone and searched in wherever I'm searching for. So where are they all? Well, they haven't really been published as of yet. Okay, so we only found across only a handful really of dynamic market intention notices, and then I only could find one dynamic market establishment. I'll talk about these types a little bit more in a second, but only one dynamic market establishment notice. So there's only been one notice published since the Procurement Act went live at the end of Feb, which is actually saying we're wanting to set up a dynamic market. This is how you apply to be a supplier within it. So there's only been one. Okay, there will be lots more coming over the coming months and years. Okay, and I'll talk about that a little bit more when we go into the frequently asked questions, because it is relevant to it. I will skip to the second question just for some continuity. I've said that we're not seeing very many of them coming through, and there's a couple of different reasons for that. Before the notice type UK 14, looking at the second question here, folks, a dynamic market establishment notice. That's to say, okay, here's a dynamic market, here's what you do, here's a link, what it's all about, and here's a link to apply to it. Okay. Before authorities are putting out one of those, they are going to put out a UK 13 notice, which is a dynamic market intention notice. This is the notice to say we are going to be looking to establish a dynamic market, and here's the time scale, etc. This is what it's going to be about. So it's kind of like a pre-market a warning or a market engagement type piece, prior information notice type notice to say it's coming, but they're to do a 13 notice first, that intention notice first, and then they do the 14 notice, which is the establishment notice. So we've seen, I think there were 8 or 9 intention notices that we saw, and then so far that's only led to actually one establishment notice, but you would expect a lag. So that intention notice will always be higher over the coming months than the establishment notice, because as they want to do more, they've got to do that 13 before they do the 14. Okay. The other thing that might be apparent if we're thinking about it is a lot of them will be existing DPS. This is me skipping to the fourth question on the page now. Existing DPSs were not scrapped at the point the Procurement Act went live. They are carrying on in the same way that all existing contracts are carrying on for their duration. Those aren't being scrapped, and DPSs are of a long time. Okay, so typically like a long duration. So what you'll see is that DPSs, as they start to expire, will be replaced by dynamic markets. Okay, and my understanding is it's actually 2029, Feb 2029 is as far as a DPS can be extended or can run up to. After that, anything that's done after that would be a dynamic market. Okay, so it's a few years away. So what we'll see is as they're expiring, they'll be replaced by dynamic markets. So we'll see more and more, but it might be a bit of a kind of gradual piece for them to come through. Okay, but do look out for them and do know what they mean. The other point I'd say that should act as a little bit of reassurance is any given dynamic market opportunity that you see, again, as with every public sector opportunity, the document pack should in and of itself have the information within it to determine how it's going to work, what you've got to do to apply and what any requirements are for that application. Okay. So with these, as with everything else, minimum requirements will be clearly listed, and for for dynamic markets, that should be explicit. If you meet a standard, you will get accepted. Therefore, when you read those documents, it should be clear. You should be able to say yes, we will, or no, actually we don't meet all these minimum requirements. Therefore, we won't get accepted. Therefore, there's no point at this stage applying. We need to go and change some things to be able to do that. And one other question that came up quite a lot: do you ever pay to join a dynamic market? In short, no, you'll never have to pay to join, but what you might find is that some of them, there will be a small percentage fee of any revenues, any work that you win through the dynamic market will be charged to you as a fee for the sort of maintenance and running of the dynamic market. Okay, so again, it shouldn't be an earth-shattering amount, but typically you might see something, I don't know, 1%, 2%, etc. So a small fee that's charged, but again, that will be explicit, and you can determine if you feel that's appropriate based on, actually at the point at which you're going to apply to the dynamic market, it'll be clear what that is. Okay, so that was one of the ones that came up a fair few times as well. Just as a conclusion then, very briefly, folks, dynamic markets are the upgrade and update to dynamic purchasing systems, and from February of this year, February 24th of this year, we shouldn't see any new DPSs being launched. You find the dynamic markets in whatever way you've got set up to alert you to tenders that are coming in of other descriptions, and you'll find dynamic markets as you would then. One of the things for any new entrants into the public sector, if you are just looking at opportunities as they become live, what you won't see within those is existing DPSs that might have been running for 2, 3, 4 years, but that you would be interested in. So what you want to do is at least make sure you do a back search of open opportunities to make sure existing DPSs that you've had sight of those, and you can make a determination as to whether you want to pursue those, because like I've said, they will carry on for their sort of existing term, even though if any new ones are going to be dynamic markets instead of DPSs. UK4 tender notices, again, we can look at these and see what work is being, or what goods or services are being procured through a dynamic market, even if we're not members of it, because they're associated contract notices for those goods and services procurement. So we'll be able to see what's being procured through a given one, and therefore help us to determine if we want to join it based on what's being procured. We apply for it as we would any other opportunities, make sure we're registered on whichever portal it's running through, expressing our interest, analysing the tender documents, and applying where we meet the minimum requirements to participate. Okay. And make sure that we have a good mechanism in place to make sure we're monitoring opportunities that come out of the dynamic market, as well as the dynamic market establishments themselves. So have we got that robust system in place? Are we picking up all of the tender notices that are being published across the UK and beyond, if we're interested in those markets? And again, last point, don't be overly concerned if we don't see, I just saw the lovely snail image. Don't be alarmed if you're not seeing any dynamic markets already for the goods and services that you're looking to procure. It is probably that there are existing DPSs that will run their course before they will be switched over to dynamic markets, but do keep an eye on them for essentially for brand new rather than replacement ones. So there will be some, but don't expect a deluge at this point, but do keep an eye out for them. If you do see them, understand that they are the new and upgraded, updated version of a DPS, and do consider pursuing them as a good step. Okay, folks, I am within the hour, but I'm not within 40 minutes. Close, but no cigar. If you want to carry on the conversation, do give us drop us a note on that email address, bidsupport@tendersdirect.co.uk, or you can try and give us a ring. We'd be happy to carry on and answer any specific questions that you might have, if anyone's interested in terms of the platform that's not a Tenders Direct subscriber, we can get you that demonstration and that free trial so that you can see the breadth of opportunities out there and make sure that you are capturing every single one of them to make your best pursuit opportunities and to be as successful as possible in terms of securing work through public sector routes. I think that's it. It's been really nice to speak with everyone. Thank you very much for coming on to the call. We'll have a look through the questions and see if we can get back to people on those ones as well. We typically have a webinar every month, so do look out for the next ones coming. And I really appreciate everyone taking the time out to listen on this webinar this afternoon. You will get sent, I always forget to say until I read the questions, you will get sent a link to see the recording of this so you can watch it back in a little bit more of a relaxed fashion and make sure you've picked up any of the key details that we spun through across the course of this Thursday afternoon. So that will be coming to you. And if you need anything else, any more questions, do feel free to give us drop us a note, and we'd be delighted to carry on the conversation then. But until the next time, the next webinar, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for sticking with me, and I hope you got lots of benefits out of it, and we'll see you at the next one. Bye for now.